receiving information about a potential air attack. The embassy has told employees to shelter in place and US citizens elsewhere in the capital to be ready if an air alert is announced. Meanwhile,
it breaks my heart when I see my male counterparts suffering. When I try to talk to them about what's really hurting them, they can't accept it. There's such a huge problem where men are conditioned to never see themselves as a victim, forces they cannot immediately change. I mean, that's one aspect of it. Okay. You know, toxic masculinity and the like. But also, there's not a whole lot of, especially in the podcast space and shit like that, there's not a whole lot of like great male role models that men can point to and position themselves as, or try to basically behave as, you know. That is the reality. And the role models that do exist, myself included, as a 33-year-old man who works pretty fucking hard, who values working out, who has a similar interest to many other young men in general, even though I'm not young myself, are routinely targeted and attacked by weak men on the right, on the fucking podcast orbit, as gay and soy. And the people that call me gay and soy have, one, never gotten a pussy wet in their whole fucking goddamn lives, and are not even half my fucking size. So I think that there's a lot of hallucinating happening in this situation as well. I think that there is a lot of people who just aren't also fitting the stereotypical mold of what they consider to be masculine men. But they also think if you say the right things and if you engage in this kind of fucking bravado, right, then I guess you are masculine. I guess you are alpha. The concept of masculinity in and of itself already is a silly one too, because I don't think people truly understand what masculinity is. This take is kind of pissing me off, to be honest. All right, get pissed off. I think people just assume positive traits and associate positive traits with masculinity. Or some people associate negative traits with masculinity, you know, toxicity and the like. But ultimately, if you look at the alpha dog podcaster space, like the Manosphere, all the bros and whatnot, okay, they associate masculinity with just confidence. That's it. And leadership traits. And if that's the assertion that we're supposed to operate on, if that masculinity simply means that you're a confident guy, self-assured, and that you're, working towards your goals or whatever, okay, then a lot of these podcasters themselves do not actually fit that mold at all. They're faking it. They're faking till they make it in some ways. Because real confidence doesn't come from external validation. It comes from within. Something that I try to explain to people all the time. Hiding behind the mic? Me? Yeah, always. I famously never go outside. Who do you think fits the traditional mold of masculinity if masculinity is simply confidence? Someone like myself or someone like Tim Pool? Who do you think fits the traditional mold of masculinity if masculinity means leadership qualities, working hard, and once again, confidence? Someone like myself or someone like Sneeko? Someone like myself or someone like Ben Shapiro? That's it. But because a lot of people are genuinely insecure, especially young boys. I mean, I was young once myself. Okay, I was a young boy once myself. I know what it's like to be insecure, to question yourself, to worry about your future. Okay, I get it. And I know what it's like if in that process you find the worst role models. Okay? The point is, a lot of people, especially in the manosphere, take advantage of that insecurity and that vulnerability. They take advantage of that and they delude people into thinking that they are the outward representation of masculinity. They are the real alpha dogs, the real manly men. And they try to tell you that all the time. One common principle that I've always maintained is if you have to say it, well, then you ain't it. Okay? If you have to consistently claim that you are, if you have to consistently say that you're an alpha male, that you're a high value male, then you do not fit that standard. You do not fit the standard that you yourself have set. Okay? The standard is set by those like LeBron James. That's it. That right there is a legend. A legendary masculine figure, a good dad, a leader. Okay? Someone who has overcome great oppression, like being bald. He's overcome it perfectly. Okay, I'm pouring honey on my goat again. All right. Anyway, that was a little take on masculinity and whatnot, but let's get to U.S. Embassy in Kyiv closes over potentially significant air attack.
U.S. officials say the Biden administration is sending anti-personnel mines to Kyiv to deploy for defensive purposes, only in eastern Ukraine, though. That decision comes days after the White House approved the use of longer-range weapons by Ukraine to strike inside Russian territory. Moscow says Kyiv fired US-supplied ATACMS at a weapons arsenal in the Bryansk region on Tuesday. In apparent response, Vladimir Putin updated Russia's nuclear doctrine, saying,
I can't get over the fact that these weapons are called ATACMS. It just like makes it so cutesy. Oh, just a bunch of ATACMS.
Moscow now has the right to use nuclear weapons in response to attacks using conventional weapons. That brought a defiant response from the Ukrainian president.
Yeah, by the way, I believe that earlier today I saw some reporting that they were starting to use French and British weapons as well, the Ukrainians were, to target inside of Russian territory, which definitely spells trouble for both the UK and also for France.
1,000 days, I think it's enough to understand that Putin doesn't want any peace. Even this day, they killed our civilians. Even, especially this day, they presented nuclear weapons strategy. Why? They didn't present peace strategy. Did you hear it? Did you read about it? No, of course. Of course, nuclear weapons strategy. Putin wants war.
Well, Volodymyr Zelensky claims the North Korean troop deployment to Russia could grow beyond 100,000. Already, South Korean officials say Pyongyang has sent close to 11,000 troops to Russia, with some actually on the battlefield as well. We're covering this story from all angles. Mike Valerio is in Seoul, South Korea, but we're going to begin with Nick Payton-Walsh in Kyiv. What more do we know about the nature of this potential attack on US embassy?
Yeah, look, I mean, we're not hearing specifically that the embassy is indeed a target. It is simply that the American embassy is taking the exceptional measures, not one we've seen since the start of the war, the invasion in February 2022, as far as we can recall, of closing their facility entirely for, I mean, the day it seems, possibly longer now. That is, they say, as a result of concerns about an air assault.
Where's your windsock, my man? You're a professional news broadcaster.
Look, tell ordinary residents of the capital here about that. They had 2.5-hour air raid siren this morning, another 45-minute one early in the early hours of the morning too. So very used to incoming attacks. It's a nightly thing here, but it is highly abnormal for essentially American diplomats to be told to shelter away and stay away from their place of work. The significance, well, of course, we are looking to see what escalation Russia might try and bring to this 1,000-day-long war after US missiles have been fired into Russia itself. That was in the last 24 hours. Since then, Ukraine has said it's hit more targets inside of Russia. The severe battalion, Russian military battalions, facilities inside Ukrainian Defense Intelligence said they hit overnight. So that onslaught is continuing. And I think the question is exactly what the nature of a Russian response would be. The sort of saber rattling the Russian President Vladimir Putin has been accused of, it's hard to quite define exactly how strident the change in their nuclear doctrine really is. But ultimately, it is the Kremlin head using the word nuclear again and trying to remind the West that this is a nuclear power that is struggling conventionally on the battlefield here and has done for a while, seeing an ascendance on the Eastern Front on multiple locations, but I think also struggling now to find a way to meaningfully respond to this extraordinary permission by the Biden administration to use these ATACMS longer range missiles inside of Russia. It's aimed at obviously trying to give Ukraine a bit of an upper hand on the battlefield, a battlefield where they have been losing over the past months in multiple different directions, and possibly complicate the life of President-elect Donald Trump when he comes to power in January. But behind me here, it's quiet, but I think it's fair to say that the fact that the Americans are warning quite so specifically about the hours ahead and an air assault has left many people, I think, anxious. Their information has been pretty good, frankly, for much of this entire war, and so I think there are worries here that it may be Western targets potentially at the end of any renewed or intensified air assault here against the capital, Max.
How would that be interpreted, Nick, from the American point of view? Would an American embassy abroad be seen as an attack on America?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think we don't want to get into the whole idea of how this might escalate into direct conflict between those two nuclear powers. But I think if we saw the US embassy here specifically hit by Russian munitions, that would, of course, massively escalate matters. And that may not be precisely what the US embassy here is directly concerned about, but, you know, there are multiple different targets across this city where Westerners, where those from the European and NATO allies backing Ukraine reside or known to frequent. So I think it's a broad capital city on edge here. But I should stress, I don't think at this point, regardless of the escalation we've seen over the last 48 hours, that Moscow necessarily wants to take any strident steps that force it into a direct conflict with the United States. Yes, much of the sales pitch to Putin's domestic audience is that they are already at war with NATO as a whole. That's their way of explaining how badly, frankly, the war has gone for them over 1,000 days. It was only supposed to last a matter of weeks, so many advocates of the Kremlin said when they began the invasion. But I don't feel at this point necessarily that Russia has the desire, the capability to start something larger with the NATO alliance, Max.
Okay, Nick, thank you so much for joining us from Kyiv. Let's go for the latest then on those North Korean troops in Russia. Mike Valerio joins us from Seoul. And if the intelligence we're getting right from the South Koreans, well, if it is right, it does suggest the North Korean role in this conflict could be much bigger than we thought.
Bro, every time they talk about North Korea, I'm reminded of the Albania quote. Was it Enver Hoxha? What did he say? Hold on. I don't know if it was Enver Hoxha that said that, but it was like between us and China, we make up 1 billion communists or something. Ban Hassan. Yes. If you write it in my chat long enough, maybe it'll happen. It's fantastic. Every time they bring up North Korea, I'm like, what are you saying? North Korea getting endless media coverage out here, okay? They're getting so much good media. North Korea, the powerful nation, the scary powerful nation that the world has to reckon with. Respect.
Or
That's right, Max. And it's new details in two buckets that are coming from the spy agency here in Seoul. First of all, what North Korean soldiers are doing. And second of all, what pieces of artillery Pyongyang in North Korea is sending to the front lines to the war in Ukraine. So when we talk about the pieces of artillery, we have a 240 millimeter multiple rocket launch system vehicle.
Yeah, no, they got hella artillery because, you know, just like Ukraine is getting the artillery from South Korea, Russia's getting their artillery from North Korea. And the reason for why they're getting their artillery from there is because they have an endless fucking production line of artillery shells because they still use artillery. You know? No, I mean, they don't even use it necessarily, but like they have that as the deterrent surrounding the DMZ. Having said that, however, America has ramped up its own artillery manufacturing, as we talked about before. And, oh my God. How does North Korea manufacturing work? Where do they source their materials? I actually don't know, but I suspect that they probably source their materials internally. Like, doors open.
Or vehicles, I should say.
Or probably China. Yeah.
Plural, that are being sent from North Korea to Russia, according to South Korea's spy agency. Think of those as.
But I think they probably source it internally too. Don't they have a decent amount? Like North Korea had a lot of industry before the Korean War. Like that area when it was just Korea. Yeah, North Korea, much like Turkey, is at the table. I would assume that they are relatively self-sufficient. You know, Jucha and all, as a principle of self-reliance.
Vehicles, big old trucks with a lot of rocket launchers on the back. You see them all the time in propaganda parades that go through the heart of North Korea's capital. Also, the second piece of artillery that's being sent, the second group, we're talking about 170 millimeter self-propelled guns. Think of those similar to tanks. Tanks are meant for short-range warfare. Self-propelled guns are meant for longer-range warfare. So we have those new details, but also what is happening with these North Korean troops. Everybody in the West and here in South Korea seems to be in agreement that the numbers now are around 11,000 at the moment. And Seoul is saying that Russia is training North Korean troops in terms of tactics and also drone response. And why those two things are important, Max, is because we have a fighting force of around 1.3 million people from North Korea, but they're in this self-contained hermit nation. Not a lot of combat experience outside of the borders of North Korea in either of our lifetimes. So this is critical training that Russia is giving to North Korean service members in order to tell them how to fight against drones. Do they have that experience in North?
You are cooked, my guy. Be smart and disappear. Now they're coming after you. X 100,000. Who? Fox News? Everyone. I think I'm good, man. I think I'm all right. Everyone's coming after me. Hi, Mom. Hi. Hey, Dad. You're on the Mossad list 100%. I doubt that they're going to fucking busy themselves with a fucking Twitch streamer. You know? Buy Doge. Got it. Smartest minds warning me of the
North Korea, not so much. So again, to what President Zelensky was saying earlier in the show, the potential for up to 100,000 North Korean troops to make their way, or at least to be ready for deployment to the war in Ukraine. We just want to put that in perspective before we go, Max. When we're talking about a fighting force that is just north of 1 million people, having a tenth of that fighting force being ready to be deployed to fight in Ukraine, that is an astounding statement. That is certainly astounding to think about. And it hasn't been publicized at all in North Korea. When we news gather here in the Bureau in Seoul, we always watch North Korean state TV. Nary a peep. Nothing has been said on state TV about these thousands of North Korean troops being sent to Russia's war in Ukraine. So if you have this huge section of troops, who knows what that could portend for the regime that relies on the army, the military, for stability from its point of view and its future. So a lot to watch here, but bottom line, a lot of new details that came from the spy agency here in Seoul as to what exactly is happening with the North Korean troops who have headed to the front lines in Ukraine and Russia, Max.
Okay, thanks so much for that, Mike in Seoul.
CBS News has confirmed that Ukraine has used American-made long-range missiles inside Russia for the very first time. Holly Williams got to Kyiv yesterday and just had to get down into a bunker. So, Holly, first question, are you and the team all right? We want to know that first. And what can you tell us about the missiles?
Good morning, Gail. We're all doing just fine. The air raid alarm went off just a few minutes ago. We've taken shelter in the basement. We are taking this very seriously because the U.S. Embassy here in Kyiv is temporarily closed because of a potential significant air attack. Now, a Ukrainian military official told us earlier today that they have information that Russia could try to strike the center of Kyiv today with ballistic missiles.
Ukraine fired 8 American-made ATACMS into Russia, say US officials. This video appears to show a launch, though we can't verify it. The target was a military facility in the Bryansk region of southern Russia, according to the Russian Defense Ministry. US officials believe the Russians may have shot down 2 of the missiles, powerful weapons with a maximum range of close to 200 miles.
We had to prove that these are legitimate targets and that they're very important to protect our civilian population or our armed forces.
Alexandra Ustinova is a member of Ukraine's parliament who told us she lobbied the US government to allow Ukraine to use the ATACMS deep inside Russia. President Biden only agreed to it 3 days ago, worried it could escalate the conflict. The Kremlin, though, seems to be stoking fears of an escalation. Vladimir Putin approved a change in Russia's nuclear doctrine yesterday.
Yeah. So I mean, the OG escalators are always going to be Russia because they invaded Ukraine. But you just also came to the same conclusion and admitted that Joe Biden recognized that this would be an escalation that, increases America's involvement.
lowering the threshold for a nuclear strike.
He keeps playing and pretending like he's going to do something.
It sounds like you don't take Vladimir Putin's threats too seriously, and you don't think that the West should either.
I've been saying it since day one that he's a bully and he's not going to do that.
The nuclear threat may be.
I think the craziest thing about this entire situation is that the people who are directly under imminent threat are not Americans, I don't think. It's Ukrainians. And they will come to a horrifying conclusion that the Western world simply does not give a fuck about them if Putin does the unthinkable, insane thing and actually ends up using what John Kirby has called baby nukes. There was another moment of nuclear escalation that took place in this conflict early on where American leadership, like the State Department, very quickly was like, yeah, if they use nukes, like, it'll be mini nukes, it'll be tactical nukes. It's not that big of a deal. And it will be in Ukraine. I do think it's a big deal. So I don't know. If Russia uses nukes, I'll probably quit my job. No need to work then. Yeah.
A bluff. But Putin's war in Ukraine is very real. In a video message to a congressional hearing yesterday, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky thanked America for helping his country in its darkest hour.
Thanks to the incredible support of the United States, millions of Americans united against evil.
Today, Russia accused the Biden administration of trying to prolong the war in Ukraine. Also today, Ukraine says Russia launched over 120 drones and 6 missiles overnight. Gail.
Thank you, Holly. Reporting from Kyiv.
Fox News alert, the U.S. Embassy in Kyiv now shut down over the threat of a Russian air attack. This comes after President Biden gave the green light for Ukraine to start using ATACMS missiles to strike inside Russia for the first time. Vladimir Putin officially lowering the threshold for the use of nuclear weapons, which he always says. Fox News chief foreign correspondent and Black Saturday author Trey Yingst joins us now after his interview with President Zelensky yesterday. We're going to hear a little bit more of that in a moment. First off, Trey.
Damn, they took our boy out of Israel.
You've been there when the war first started. You go back now. What's the big difference?
Yeah, Brian, good morning. Many things here in Ukraine are actually the same as they were about 2.5 years ago when the Russians launched that ground invasion on February 24th of 2022. Just hours after we arrived in the country, air raid sirens were sounding from Kyiv to Lviv, sending millions of people to bomb shelters as the Russians continue both air and ground attacks. They're using now Iranian drones and missiles to target major population centers here. And there's real concern today that following that approval from the Americans, allowing the Ukrainians to launch long-range missiles into Russian territory, that there will be further Russian retaliation. We heard air raid sirens earlier today in the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv. And the U.S. Embassy here in this population center of about 4 million people issued a rare alert this morning. They said the U.S. Embassy in Kyiv received specific information of a potential significant air attack on November 20th. The embassy will be closed and recommends U.S. citizens be prepared to immediately shelter in the event of an air alert if one is announced. This is significant and, again, unprecedented to see the embassy close here in the Ukrainian capital. Earlier today, I spoke with the mayor of Kyiv, Vitaly Klitschko. He was warning civilians here to stay close to shelters, but he wanted to emphasize one point, saying that Ukraine has been under attack for more than 1,000 days and that missile attacks against this city and other major population centers across the country aren't rare at all.
Yeah, yesterday we understand there were 8 missiles, 2 were knocked down by the Russians. We don't know about the damage. Here's a little more of your interview with President Zelensky. You have not seen, they have not seen at home yet. You lived it. Watch.
Have you accepted that under any sort of ceasefire agreement or peace deal that some Ukrainian territory may remain in Russian hands?
We cannot legally acknowledge any occupied territory of Ukraine as Russian. That is about those territories which used to be occupied by Putin before the full-scale invasion since 2014. Legally, we are not acknowledging that. We are not adopting that. On the other hand, we understand that so far we do not have that much of force, so that in the weapons with our hands, we could push Putin back to the line of 1991.
When we look at the diplomatic red lines for the Russians, the other side of this ultimate negotiation that will take place one day, one of those...
Ukraine is running out of manpower. Majority of Ukrainians now want a ceasefire deal immediately for the first time over the course of the past 1,000 days. When he says we want 1991 boundaries, Zelensky has in the past conceded to putting the annexation of Crimea to a vote 15 years into the future, which at the time I thought was like a pretty solid way to get around the public pressure that he could have gotten. That was the 15-point plan that they had negotiated in Turkey. But since then, obviously, Ukraine has been occupied further. Or Russia has taken over even more territory, killed even more people, displaced even more Ukrainians. So now they're in a weaker position overall in terms of negotiating. And there have been numerous points to go back to that would be beneficial and could potentially, like, if Vladimir Putin was interested in making these concessions, like, I think the best possible option in this situation would be the Minsk agreements, which I think will never happen, but who knows? Where there's an autonomous LPR and DPR that is still firmly within Ukrainian control. Or the second best option would still be the complete removal of Russian forces from the currently annexed Russian territories. I don't know if Vladimir Putin would even concede to that, but I think that is the most just option.
Red lines is Crimea, a portion of Ukraine that was annexed in 2014. President Vladimir Putin has been very clear Crimea will never return to Ukrainian hands. Are you willing to give up Crimea in pursuit of a peace deal to end this war and stop the bloodshed in Europe?
I was already mentioning that we are ready to bring Crimea back diplomatically. We cannot spend dozens of thousands of our people so that they perish for the sake of Crimea and come back. And still, it's not the fact that we can bring it back with the arms in our hands. So we understand that Crimea can be brought back diplomatically.
So
we spent more than 10 hours with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky along the eastern front lines, and he says they will continue fighting even if U.S. support is cut. But he did tell us he believes Ukraine will lose the war if Ukraine loses military funding from the United States.
Trey,
Brian?
real quick, you were there in the beginning of the war with him. You've interviewed him before. He looks the same. I mean, for a guy that's not seeing his family every day, he's at war for 1,000 days. What is your takeaway?
Yeah, he was jovial. He was very talkative about the situation on the ground. And later today on Fox, we'll have more information about what he told us regarding those long-range U.S. supplied missiles. I asked him, have you considered this? Is this true? Is the Biden administration willing to let Ukraine fire these missiles into Russia? And he said, not yet. We haven't fired any today. Hours later, according to reports, Zelensky ordered those strikes into Russian territory. And so he still is very active in the process, despite being a relatively young leader with not a lot of military background. But we do know he wants to continue the fight, and he is calling on the incoming administration to support him in those efforts. Brian?
There are bad guys in this fight, and it's not him, and it's not the Ukrainians. Trey, thanks so much. Great job. Look forward to seeing more of your interview. From one war zone to another. Pick up a copy of Trey's book, Black Saturday. It is excellent. Thank you, Trey Ying.
I'm Steve Doocy.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe.
So, Sean, just talk to us about
American foreign policy's uniparty, baby. They say the same exact shit about Israel, too. You got to remember, it's not a Fox News change of heart. You're not paying attention. Republicans, chat, the average Republican probably does not give a fuck about Ukraine. There's probably a big chunk of Democrats who don't either, and probably ask in normal conversations like, why the fuck are we giving so much money to Ukraine? Okay. Having said that, however, the Republican Party, or at least its like messaging apparatus, has rarely ever been anti-Ukraine. There are politicians that have said anti-Ukraine shit. Republican politicians have said that. Donald Trump has said some anti-Ukraine shit. But overall, American foreign policy, regardless of the optics, is uniparty. Do you think Zelensky should have given up Crimea early instead of fighting? Zelensky said he would put up Crimea's annexation to a vote 15 years down the line. Which at the time I credited him for making a very wise choice that would have also come across as like, I mean, that was a smart move, the way he talked about Crimea. The problem is, this is like so far past that point. Like, that's not even a conversation right now. I think he has to say, you know, we're going to take back every single inch of territory, because otherwise they'll fucking kill him. But I think he also understands that, like, Crimea in and of itself is like permanently annexed, and has always been a unique, has always had a unique relationship regardless. Many people don't understand the history of it, but that's irrelevant in this conversation. What's more relevant, I think, is the currently annexed and occupied Ukrainian territories and what will happen.
this reported use of the Storm Shadow?
Yeah, it's been interesting, Kamali, hasn't it, that we've been known that the Storm Shadow has been actually being used by the Ukrainians for well over a year now. And actually, when it was first released by the UK to be used, my understanding was that they said to President Zelensky, as long as it's used within the law of armed conflict, you can use it wherever you like. It was only subsequently that America got a bit more nervous, particularly when Ukrainians moved into Russia itself. They've become a lot more nervous, and therefore they wanted to have a sort of a harmonised view about this. Now that the US has said that the ATACMS missile can be used into Russia, we understand now that the British government is not likely to make an announcement about it. It's almost certainly a phone call to President Zelensky, just get on with it. The Storm Shadow missile is an incredibly capable missile. We've got the ranges here. The Storm Shadow, at the advertised range of the model that they've probably got is about 155 miles. The ATACMS range just slightly more than that outside, but it's quite deep inside the territory. And it's the sort of targets that headquarters, logistics supply lines, energy headquarters, all the sort of things that Russia's been striking Ukraine. It's exactly the sort of thing, precision strike. One of the challenges, of course, is that Keir Starmer will not want to be drawn because he won't want to be made a target here. But I suspect that already, even though there aren't many of these missiles left in the war stocks for President Zelensky, we've reports that most of the Russian fighter jets have already moved their basing further out, away from Ukraine. Why does
Crimea was already lost before the 2022 war even started. Putin did not start the war for Crimea. The fight is not only about their territory, it's about Russian language and Ukrainian sovereignty. Watching this from Ukraine, this chat is mostly oblivious. What part of Ukraine are you watching from, brother? He's the one guy still living in Kharkiv that's like kind of chill with Russia after all things have happened. Kharkiv was like relatively pro-Russia before the invasion. As far as I understand. Oh, never mind. Okay, no, he is anti-Russian. I misunderstood what he was saying. Kharkiv was like somewhat pro-Russia, or at least there was enough like people who consider themselves ethnic Russian before the invasion and also the complete death and destruction of Kharkiv, and now it's gone. I mean, you confuse it with Donetsk? No, I don't confuse it with Donetsk. The theory holds that the further east you went, the more people were, the more east you went in Ukraine, the more people were like agnostic towards Russia, or even in certain instances, not that anti-Russia. That is completely done now. I'm not saying that is the case any longer. Yeah, see? Kharkiv went from 75% pro-Russia to about fringe radicals and 80-year-olds supporting Putin only. Yeah, that's the quickest way to fucking lose any sort of genuine support you might have had, by blowing up fucking entire city blocks. There is no way that there's no way they're gonna sit there and be like, no, the guy's blowing my shit up, I'm actually super on board with. Of course not. And they did that, which is yet another, the idiotic point for the pro-Putin, pro-Russia, push-in Z people. Having said that, I think one of the most annoying parts about this conversation is that like, did you get banned off X, or is it just me? It's just you. One of the most annoying aspects of this conversation always is that like anytime America looks at restrictions that they currently have for Ukraine and how Ukraine can fight, the way I look at it is, are they going to is this going to improve Ukraine's standing? Or is it going to simply escalate or continue the war? And I fear that, allowing targeting capabilities to Ukraine, like Western weapons, so that they can hit inside of Russia, I don't think it's going to end up changing the trajectory of this battle or this invasion. Just like I didn't think that Ukraine invading and doing an offensive in Kursk was going to change the outcome of this battle at all. I have a former coworker who lives in Kyiv and is from Ukraine. He has an infant who's probably 1 at this point and a daughter who's 3 or 4. The daughter has known nothing but war. I've kept in touch with this friend of mine since he went back and through the war. I pleaded with him to leave, and now he can't since he could potentially be forced to enlist. His family refuses to leave him and go west. Shit is actually so sad. Yeah. I know that long-range missiles have defensive value. I understand that, chatter. But if the problem overall for Ukraine's defenses is that they're lacking in manpower and that Russia simply has more people and more tools to win the war of attrition, then it doesn't matter if you give them long-range targeting capabilities. The only thing you can give them is direct boots on the ground. And not even just like the foreign mercenaries or the foreign military units that they've created. Like, you just straight up need to send in tens and thousands of trained troops. That's what you need to do. And that, if those trained units come from any NATO countries, obviously expands the conflict severely. And that's the other side of this equation. Bro, you are out of your depth, I think, on this. Yeah, I know. Everyone always loves saying that. I'm out of my depth on this, but all the Ukraine is winning the battle guys yelled at me when I said Ukraine had the upper hand and leverage and should have packed up that 15-point plan in Turkey. And that would have been the fantastic opportunity for them to engage in some kind of ceasefire. It turns out I was right. And every one of my naysayers was just so fucking wrong. That's the difference.
Does that matter? It certainly protects them, but it makes it a lot more difficult to do trips in and out of because you've got further to go.
And this comes, of course, a few hours after it was announced by President Biden that anti-personnel mines are going to be given to the Ukrainians. How are they going to be used and why?
Yeah, there's millions of mines available. I think this story is quite interesting only because you sort of mentioned that anti-tank mines were given nice and early. Why has it waited for so long? Part of the story is we've got an example of a Russian mine here, the PFM-1 mine, known as the green parrot or the butterfly mine itself. These can be scattered in large numbers. It looks big next to me. It's only about 5 inches long in actuality. But they can be thrown out the back of large transport aircraft or helicopters. They spin down. They've got little wings like a sycamore leaf, scattered on the ground. They self-destruct. They're meant to self-destruct in 40 hours, but they're not that reliable. And unfortunately, many of them, therefore, remain on the ground, not exploded. And the trouble is they're light, they float around, it's very difficult to track, and they get everywhere. And that's one of the reasons that the US have therefore agreed finally that they can supply mines. Let's have a look at theirs. The one big thing is they're electrically initiated. What I mean by that is with a Russian mine, if you step on it, it's a mechanical movement and a bit like a gun firing, mechanical action, fires and it blows up. The American ones rely on a battery, and you make a circuit when you step on the landmine. Why is that important? It makes it quite reliable, but it also means it relies on the length of the battery charge. When the battery is emptied, it is now completely harmless, and the battery dies within about 40 hours. So you don't get this same sort of problem with the legacy. And part of that reason, tragically, is because these anti-personnel mines, there's lots of effort around the world to try to manage the use of these because...
Tragically. Tragically, So we're making Eastern Ukraine a literal minefield? Brother, Eastern Ukraine is already a literal minefield. Those butterfly mines that they're talking about, Russia put them everywhere. Russia already fucking hardened their position and mined the living shit out of Eastern Ukraine. Every territory that they fucking occupied is like, is filled to the goddamn brim. It's terrifying. It's really fucked up.
Because they have been littered around. They last for years, causing devastating consequences. This is just from 2023. At least 5,500 casualties, 84% of those are civilian, nearly 2,000 deaths. And tragically, look at the numbers, 37% of those are innocent children because they pick up those little green things, think they're toys, and it's devastating consequences for them.
Yeah. Okay, so on the American mines that they're going to get then, Sean, where are they likely to be deployed and when do we think this is going to happen?
I think it could happen very quickly. Let's hit that one on the head nice and swiftly because they're not particularly large. They can be transported out pretty quickly. The question is where, because you've got to have some form of priority of where you're going to put them. You could put them in the Donbass because what the Ukrainians are desperately trying to do is slow the advance of the Russians. You don't use mines if you're on the offense because they get in your way. You do it to try and slow down your enemy. The challenge of using them anywhere in the Donbass region, though, is you'll push them onto Ukrainian territory, which you might want to seize back. That may not be what they actually want to focus on. I suspect it'll be up in the Kursk region. Yep. That's where the Ukrainians got a little enclave. The Russians are pushing hard to try and get them out. If they could put a ring of steel of those landmines, that just might be a way of maintaining that enclave until potential for some form of negotiation.
Okay, Sean, always appreciate your analysis. As always, thank you so much.
Mr. Speaker, I want